Hi, this is Dr. Abraham. This is the beginning podcast that we plan to do serially to address issues affecting global politics, particularly with focus on the seven regions, the seven continents. We'll be addressing these from the point of view of geopolitics. And at the same time, we will employ an interdisciplinary approach. That is to say, we're not depending solely on politics, but politics, faith, religion, and other aspects and other disciplines to help to fully understand the history of the universe and at the same time the present state of the universe. That is to say that we plan to emphasize the fact that the history of the universe consists mainly of people, not just of things. Again, this is the first broadcast we're having. I've decided to use this opportunity to address certain issues, particularly with respect to Africa. There's an election coming up in Nigeria in a few weeks. It would help us to tease out certain aspects of this, our podcast. And then as we go along, it will become increasingly, obvious what we're trying to do with respect to this podcast. Now, focusing on Nigeria just for a second. Every time there is some form of a government change in Nigeria, there's always something, or not just in Nigeria, in Africa, period. There's always some sort of a rejoicing about, okay, there's a new government, and then sooner, rather than later, the government that is so welcomed becomes inevitably maligned or becomes inevitably discredited. Then the question becomes, what did the people not know before they elected either the president or the prime or the members of parliament and so on and so forth. The leadership of any country is drawn from the population. Again, we'll focus on geopolitics. We'll focus on Africa, at this initial stage, and the idea will be to further, shed attention on why the more things change in Africa, the more they remain the same. Democracy, at one point, has become a phenomenon, at least until lately. It was as a concept universally accepted. Not exactly sure now where it stands in light of recent global events. It's still high on the priority of systems of governance, but at the same time, it's becoming increasingly clear that there are peculiarities and there are nuances, to how the system works. And particularly, again, as we said earlier, the universe consists, the history of the universe is based primarily on the history of people, not things. And so the democracy actually is not an exception. The system is, the system depends on participants. The leadership are participants, so are the people that follow. The leadership is essentially a decision of the people in general. Now the prevailing question then becomes this, though. Why is it that people elect the leadership? And once they elect the leadership, as I said, sooner rather than later, that same leadership or leaderships become vilified. People then begin to say, well, this is not what we bargained for. It's a constant recurrence in societies in Africa, and I dare say globally. People get tired of the leadership that they elect. And the question that needs to be answered then is why? It seems to me that there is so great an expectation on the part of the people that when they elect a leader, then the leader is supposed to be different from what the people are. An impossibility. The leadership is drawn from the population. The leadership cannot be too different from the population. If the population is overly corrupt, it stands to reason that the leadership will be the same. If the population in the success of the system, it should be evident in the political behavior of the people. So to consign the blame perennially to the leadership seems to me misplaced. Now, this is a controversial point because it's far easier for people to blame the leadership with a wave of the hand and then say, well, this has nothing to do with me. But this has everything to do with the citizen. No citizen may divorce himself or herself from the vote that is taken on election day. If the idea is to have a nation that is to say a nation as a sense of self, a community of self, then it stands to reason that the people ought to vote accordingly. You cannot vote on an ethnic basis and then decide to have a nation. That's different, unless the idea is to have a nation that just consists of just one ethnic group, or religious group for that matter. The idea of voting for one's interest includes, without a doubt, the belief that the nation supersedes ethnic group interest, or even religious group interest for that matter. That is not to say that religion or ethnicity will be completely divorced or erased from the idea of the nation, but that the nation itself is a community by itself. It's a community of people, a community of different ethnic groups, different religious groups, and just disparate groups. Even people that don't identify with any particular group because they want to be, for the lack of a better word, to be global cosmopolitans. Here's what I mean by that. There are those that will vote on the basis of ethnicity. There are those that would vote on the basis of religious bias. And then there are those who just say, well, I neither belong to this ethnic group nor this religious group. I'm just me. I call them the global cosmopolitans. Again, any system, the success or failure of any system depends on the political culture. It stands to reason. It depends on the political culture. Now, we will address some of it. We will do this globally, but we will do that also region by region. Or I should say continent by continent. There are 7 continents. And so we'll follow through with the 7 continents. We'll have guests, our speakers. We'll interview guests from different parts of the world. And we'll pay particular attention to elections globally. The idea will be to get people involved in their own political systems and just essentially to own the system. We want people to own the system. Once they own the system, they know they're a part of the system, not just a part of the system, but a part of the system. Once ownership is established, ultimately, the system gets better. The system gets better. Now, I must say this too. I bring a different perspective to this because in addition to doing this from an interdisciplinary perspective, I am also a mystic. I'm a mystic. I tend to, as I said, look at the universe from the point of people and not just things. If I'm looking at Africa, for example, I can say, well, what is it that can bring the people together and so on? And the example that comes to my mind, basically as a mystic, will say, well, how about we consider the condition and the behavior of the doves and the pigeons? What do I mean by that? The unity they display. How they always walk in pairs. Once again, that's how I would view this from a mystical perspective. I would say, well, there is life in this particular object. Because there is life in this particular object, let's study the life in this particular object and essentially translate that as a political system. You could argue that that's some form of political biology, if you will. I say this because from a mystic point of view, or from a mystical point of view, things are not generally the way they seem. Things are generally not the way they seem. I will expand on this as we go along, but this is just an introductory part of the broadcast. For now, I'm trying basically to introduce myself and introduce the podcast and elicit contributions in terms of how you would want to go ahead. This is your podcast. Africa in particular, global in general. This is your podcast. I will want to see how you would want systems to be better. Now, before I go any further, I think it's important that I also make this point. If you run a system, I take this from an interdisciplinary point of view. If you run a system on the basis of just plain love of neighbor, simple, love of neighbor. If you run a system on the basis of just plain love of neighbor, wisdom will dictate that the system will benefit everybody. Just on that basis alone. This is important because we generally like to think of ourselves as being fair in terms of conduct towards others. Now, the phrase love of neighbor is bandied around a lot. But no one is secure in any community unless everyone is secure. So there is a self-interest involved in that as well. No one is secure in any community except the entire community is secure. That is to say, no one is safe in any community or fully safe in any community until the entire community is safe. Now, the argument that can be advanced here will be, what does this have to do with politics? From an interdisciplinary point of view, then, or I should say, yes, from an interdisciplinary point of view, and also from the point of view of the mystic, you may consider then this in the form of the leadership being essentially a shepherd of the people who tends the flock. The shepherd tends the flock. The flock follow. The shepherd has his or her own responsibility. The flock has its own responsibility. If any one of these goes out of fashion or goes out of a misstep, if there's a misstep in any one of these, for example, if the flock decides that it does not want to follow, there is no allegiance anymore, either to the system or to the shepherd of the system will not work. So you can vote all you want, but unless you believe in the person you're voting for, unless you believe in the system that you're voting for, it's a futile exercise. It's a futile exercise. One must believe in one's action for it to be effective. Again, the history of the universe is the history of people. When the nation is described as a community, it's a community of people. I mean, and give an example, when someone says, well, this school or this hospital is good, they're not talking about the building. They're talking about the people that are in the building. Not just the exterior facade. What is the import of this? When one votes for a leader, one should look beyond the exterior and vote for what a leader is. What does the leader have that makes that person unique in terms of leadership qualities? That's what distinguishes one leader from another. That's what distinguishes one political shepherd from another. If the vote is made just on the basis of a material gain, or if the vote is cast on the basis of material gain, well then it should be evident to the person voting that that's a transient feeling. Material things are usually very transient. It's a transient feeling. And so there is no disappointment when the shepherd does not perform, because essentially you voted for the wrong person to begin with. But if you vote on the basis of belief, now I'm not necessarily talking about religious belief or on the belief. If you vote on the belief of the endurance of the system. If you vote on the basis of belief on a successful shepherd, in a successful shepherd, that is to say, you wish the shepherd, the political shepherd, to be successful in terms of governance, then that belief ought to be justified. In other words, a shepherd, a political shepherd, for example, will have to be someone that you believe in before you vote for the person. Now, why is this important? As I said, people would vote, in this particular case I'm using in Africa now as an example, for leaders in nations, loudly and laudably. And after 6 months, they say, well, no, this is not the guy we thought he was. Or he's not performing. And then everybody is disillusioned. From there on, it's downhill for the next 4 years. Well, why not take the time to actually look at who you're voting for? And then beyond that, even, why not take the time? Is there even, maybe we actually are ahead of ourselves in this. Is there a sense of a nation at all? Is there a sense of the nation as a community? More to the point, is the nation even governable? I have in mind now Nigeria, for example, voting in a few weeks. You can have the best constitutions in the world, but the constitutions are usually managed by people. You can write the best constitutions in the world, but unless there are people capable and truly willing to believe in the words of the Constitution, again, it's a belief in the word, believe in the word. Unless you actually believe in the word of the Constitution, that is to say, the word that actually actuates the Constitution, the Constitution as a prime mover of the direction of the country at any particular time, unless the citizen actually believes in that and so votes accordingly, it's a waste of time. It's the belief that actuates the word, that puts the word into action. Words are words. Belief, unforced belief, by the way, natural belief, the idea that this actually is part of me, belief. Forced belief is unbelief. Belief, you believe in the word. Just by believing in the word, it becomes part of you. So you act out the word. When you get to the point where you're calibrating everything that you do, minute by minute, second by second, there is no belief. That's forced belief. There's no belief in forced belief. That is why it's important to, even at the level of faith, it's important to internalize word, so that once the word is internalized, you now act freely because the word is already internalized. If the word is not internalized, then you're reading and interpreting, and then interpreting and then acting. There is no freedom in that. That's not faith. Faith in any system, political, religious, or even a social gathering, just means acting because of belief. It should come easy. It should come easy because it is word within. It is word within. Once you force it, it's not faith. The same goes for politics. Do you believe in the person that you're voting for? Better yet, on the part of the person that you are voting for, on the part of the leadership, does the leadership carry within himself or herself the belief of the nation, politically speaking. Does the shepherd, the political shepherd, carry within himself or herself the hopes of the nation? If the person you're voting for is such that they cannot carry, or you see somehow or another know that that do not carry within themselves the hopes of the nation, there's no point in voting for them. I mean, what's the point of voting for somebody that you already know is corrupt? Unless, of course, the hopes of the nations are rested in corruption. Again, it's belief in a person. Well, more than that, beliefs in the ideal of what a nation stands for. Religion and politics have something in common, you know. It's all about power. Well, the one is spiritual power. The one, politics, is power vested in the by the people in the institutions and the leadership. But they're all about power. As I said, they're both actuated by a word, not different word. The word in the religion obviously is faith in, if you're a Christian, faith in Christ. The word in religion. The word in politics, obviously, if you believe in the nation, is the word in as the Constitution as a word. But for a sense of community to prevail, the love of neighbor has to be there. The love of neighbor has to be. It's a self-interested thing, that love of neighbor. You cannot live in a carnivorous society and expect that at some point, one would thrive. Sure, maybe temporarily, eventually, no. The sense of community is important to the concept of the nation itself. The nation may be considered a vineyard of sorts. There's a vineyard, and there's a head gardener, and there are people that work in the vineyard. Does the vine bear fruit? Or I should say, does the vineyard bear fruit? It all depends on the workers in the vineyard. Depends on the leadership, but it also depends on people that are following. Allegiance to one group or another in any society over and against the interest of the nation cannot prosper the nation. The nation may not prosper. In fact, the nation cannot endure if the allegiance of the citizen is not, to her. Citizen allegiance must be to the nation, not to individuals, not to community groups, not to ethnic groups, not to religious groups. Allegiance to the nation, far above all, supersedes any private interest. Where the concept of the nation is concerned, religion is a private thing. Allegiance to the nation is a private thing. It's a universal concept for the people in the nation that constitute the nation, that form the community. It is important to make, and I cannot make this point enough, that the system is strengthened only by the people. The system is just a system. It is strengthened only by the people. Until the people actually own the system, until ownership of the system is established, there is no system for all intents and purposes. Again, going back to the idea of the concept of the pigeons and the doves. They travel in unity, in pairs. No one person's interest within the nation is above the other person next door. Your freedom stops where mine begins. In other words, we're all part of it all. We're part of it all. The leader must carry within himself or herself the mantle of the people's beliefs. The leader essentially encapsulates the people's beliefs. By that I mean encapsulates the people's values. If the leadership, I should say, has a different value system from the people, then you don't have a leader. If the leadership has values or belief system separate from the uniting beliefs of the people, then there is no leader. There is no political shepherd. This is the demand of nationalism. It is unambiguous. It is the demand of nationalism that all hands must be on deck. All hands must be on deck where the nation is concerned. It cannot be rationalized. Nationalism cannot be rationalized. It cannot be mortgaged. All hands must be on deck where the nation is concerned. To have any sort of a meaningful change, particularly I'm now regarding Africa, as I have mentioned there are elections coming up in Nigeria. It may be necessary to actually structurally change the systemic infrastructure. That is to say, the nation as it's presently constituted in terms of institutions hinges on certain things or certain things and ceremonies. An example would be traditional rulers. No doubt important to the social cohesion. But at some point, a leader ought to emerge that says, well, let's take a look at some of the structures of the system, how the systems are in place, or are we just using the same? Because if the problem is systemic, by that I mean if it is structurally systemic, unless the structure is changed, there cannot be meaningful change. Oh, by the way, regardless of who the leader is or what the leadership is. If the problem is structurally systemic, that is to say, the system is hinged on certain inhibiting elements. By inhibiting, I mean elements that actually preclude meaningful development or meaningful move forward. Then, unless the structure is either removed or strengthened, the system cannot change. Clear as daylight to me. So if we're going through the same system, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and so on and so forth, nothing has changed, then someone needs to come essentially with a magnifying glass and look at the system and say, well, look, listen, just something is not right over here. The whole idea of rewriting the Constitution, that's one thing, but that's not really what I'm talking about here now. Are there elements within the way the system is run in terms of political behavior, political culture? Are there elements that actually prohibit progress? if the elements that prohibit progress are endemic to the system, I dare say even endemic to the society, then progress is difficult. Progress will be difficult. We're talking values now. We're talking belief systems, all elements of political culture. What are the accepted? The question is a very simple one. What are the accepted norms? Are the accepted norms inimical to progress? Do they stand in the way of progress? Do the accepted norms stand inimical to progress? Once again, we'll go back and forth in time because the approach here is interdisciplinary. It's interdisciplinary. We apply politics, political science, and in fact, in other areas we'll apply, as I've said earlier, we'll apply biology. But the whole idea will be geared towards finding some sort of a solution to perennial underdevelopment, to perennial conflict, to a lack of peace, and to the status quo. We dare say something needs to change. Something needs to change for progress in Africa. Again, the mystery of the universe is about people. Someone will say, well, maybe there is time. Well, there's always time. But it's the people that actually are managers of the time. We're all managers of time. And so we're expected to manage the times wisely. What is the purpose of elections, for example, if we are just going to go around in a circle, do the same thing all over again? Elect somebody, the person comes around, does the same thing all over again, and then another 4 years comes around and say, well, we got another election. Then what? We're constantly underestimating ourselves, as if to say we cannot do better. We are constantly looking at ourselves as being incapable. And we're constantly looking at the system as if the system cannot be better. At some point, one has to look at, again, the role of faith, the role of values, the role of belief as a means to the way forward. The political wars of any country, global now, the political wars of any countries or fortunes of any country are solely dependent on the people in that country. This is global. The best constitutions are only so because there are best managers of the constitution. Yeah, the best countries are only so because there are best leaders. The word has to be actuated. In this case, the constitution as a word has to be actuated. It's a belief system. We need to keep in mind this. The nation is a community. we're all self-interested as part of the community, but as part of the community, as part of the nation as community. And the nation itself, by definition, is a community with a sense of self. No meaningful development is possible outside this concept of the nation as a sense of self. There is no meaningful development possible. We must believe in the nation for the nation to move forward. It's just as simple as that. Unless we believe in the nation, unless we own the nation, then the concept itself, the idea of the nation or the derivative of the nation, that is to say the nation state, frankly, is meaningless. The community, the nation is a sense of self, and the nation as a sense of self abides within the territory, with the government, dealing globally as a nation state. That is why the Constitution is itself the basis of the nation as a community of self. But that Constitution has to be acted upon. Leaders of communities are seldom drawn away from the population. They are drawn from the population. Leaders are drawn from the population. The leader cannot be too different from the population. As I said before, the leadership of any nation is actually drawn from the population, and the leadership of any nation ought to have at least values consistent with the values of the citizenry. The nation as a community is a community of values. It's a community of beliefs. But the beliefs concretized in the nation or nationalism as activating the word. In summary, I would reiterate what I said earlier, which is that we'll have, the podcast is not just about Africa, it's going to be global in coverage. We'll have guests come in to do our interviews, and we'll talk to them, and they will give us a sense of where their nation stand in terms of their international politics. We'll have them from Latin America, or Asia, or we'll have them globally. And hopefully at some point we'll have room for questions to be answered, viewer questions to be answered. But it's just important for now, at least, to just introduce the podcast and say this is one podcast that has an interdisciplinary approach with an element of the history of the universe in focus. There's a mystic side of it. That is to say, there is a predictive aspect to it. But one thing stands universal. The nation is a community of self, rounded and grounded in the love of neighbor. There is no other way. The nation is grounded, or should be grounded, in the love of neighbor.